Hey guys, welcome to another episode of Tried and True, where we discuss universal truths about our court system in 10 minutes or less. As someone who has spent the last 2 years observing jury trials across North America, I feel compelled to let you guys know that you can't separate law from politics. That our courts, they're not actually independent. There is literally no separation between the state and the courts, no matter how much they try and convince you that the judiciary is independent. It's literally not. And I'm going to explain this to you the best way I know how, right? By using a trial that you're already familiar with, which is the Ministry of Magic versus Harry Potter. Okay, let's go. So a couple weeks ago, right, as I was trying to prepare this podcast and thinking about what I was going to tell you guys, how I was going to tell you it, blah, 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 something came over me and it was just kind of like, watch Order of the Phoenix. Out of all the Harry Potter books, Order of the Phoenix was always my favorite. So as you may recall, at the beginning of the Order of the Phoenix, Mr. Potter ends up having to defend not only himself against a Dementor, but also Dudley against a Dementor, right? And so in order to defend him and Dudley, he ends up having to produce a Patronus charm. The problem is that he's not allowed to perform underage magic, and he's certainly not allowed to do it in the presence of a Muggle. And so what ends up happening? Mr. Potter receives a letter from the Ministry of Magic basically calling him into a disciplinary hearing. According to the indictment, Mr. Potter is accused of performing underage magic, specifically a Patronus charm in the presence of a Muggle, which is in violation of the decree for the reasonable restriction of underage sorcery, and is therefore called into a disciplinary hearing that will take place on August 12, 1995 on level 2 of the Ministry of Magic at 9 a.m. And I love this example because not only does it introduce you to the concept of courts not being independent, it also introduces you to what state abuse of power in courts looks like, right? So let's take a look. So the day arrives for Mr. Potter to attend his hearing, and he's being accompanied by Mr. Weasley, right? And here's where it starts getting a little bit weird. The hearing, as far as he knew, was supposed to take place at 9 a.m. However, upon entering the building, Mr. Weasley receives notice that the hearing has been moved from 9 a.m. to 8 a.m. Do you know what time it is at that point? It's 8:05 a.m., which effectively means that Mr. Potter is late to his hearing, right? So that's strike one. Because again, no such thing as coincidence. Strike two, not only was the hearing supposed to take place on level 2, it has now been moved to courtroom 10. And you're sitting there and you're just like, wait, Wanu, what's courtroom 10 again? I haven't watched this movie in years. Courtroom 10 is basically a dungeon. It's a dungeon that's well below level 2. It's a dungeon that hasn't been used in years. And at the time that it was being used, it was a place where a lot of serious criminals were being tried. And so it begs the question, why is this young boy accused of performing something as petty as underage magic being taken into a dungeon for a disciplinary hearing? Let's keep moving. So now, Mr. Weasley and Mr. Potter make their way down into the dungeon. They're walking down this hallway, and what do they see on their left? Cornelius Fudge having a conversation with Lucius Malfoy. What does Mr. Fudge and Mr. Malfoy have in common? Somebody please let me know. Because let me refresh your memory as to who these people are. Cornelius Fudge is the Minister of Magic. He also happens to be the judge presiding over Mr. Potter's case. Lucius Malfoy is a Death Eater. And so you ask yourself, why is the judge presiding over Mr. Potter's case having a conversation with a Death Eater? And if you recall in the movie, you hear Mr. Malfoy saying to Mr. Fudge, "I'm sure you will do the right thing." Somebody tell me what the right thing is. So the hearing starts, right? And Mr. Weasley now has to separate from Mr. Potter. Why? Because it's a closed court hearing. Do you know why courts are open to the public and why I was even able to watch jury trials across North America these past 2 years? It's because of a legal principle called open justice. Open justice basically means that justice needs to be done and seen to be done. And the reason the courts are open to the public, to the media, to you and I, is to discourage abuse of power from happening behind closed doors. And we see the opposite of open justice in this case because it's a closed court session that's happening here. Mr. Weasley not allowed to enter. And so the trial starts. And it becomes quite clear that this is a kangaroo court, right? That there are people who've already decided what Mr. Potter's fate is going to be, and that at this point, this trial exists to give the illusion of due process, right? And so this is where we start understanding why Justice Fudge was having a conversation with Mr. Malfoy. You have to understand this. You cannot separate law from politics, which is basically my way of saying trials do not exist independent from the political backdrop against which they take place. Politically, what's happening at the Ministry of Magic? Chaos. Why? Because Mr. Potter is apparently going around telling people that he's seen the Dark Lord, that the Dark Lord is back. And Justice Fudge at that point feared that the truth would undermine his authority. So already you have motive from Justice Fudge for this trial to go sideways. And then you have Mr. Malfoy. Who is he? A Death Eater, a follower of Voldemort. You have to start following the power. You officially now have two people who it would be in their best interest to discredit Mr. Potter. And it gets even worse, because you know who's attending this trial? Miss Dolores Umbridge, who we would later find out had actually sent the Dementor to Harry. And who was Dolores Umbridge? A bureaucrat for the Ministry of Magic, which effectively means that you had people who attempted to manufacture Mr. Potter's trial outcome and therefore his credibility within the wizarding world. What we're learning, right, is that a lot of trial outcomes can be manufactured. And they are being manufactured because what happened to Mr. Potter is not unique. What happened to Mr. Potter is happening to thousands of people in our court system every day. Every day, thousands of people, they walk into court and they raise their right hand and they plead not guilty. And they think the facts and evidence are going to work out in their favor. And unbeknownst to them, none of that is going to matter because there are people in high places who've already decided how that outcome is going to go. You cannot separate law from politics. Not only can't you separate law from politics, you also can't separate law from geopolitics. And to help illustrate this concept, I'm going to draw on one of the most widely known trials of all time, the State of Rome versus Jesus Christ. Because it is through a political analysis of this trial where I sat there and I realized, objectively speaking, if I was a civil servant under the Caesar administration and Pontius Pilate wanted my advice on what to do with Mr. Christ, I would have advised him to get rid of him by any means necessary. And that's just the God's honest truth. And I'll explain to you why on the next episode of Tried and True.